Welcome to Giants Nation. I'm your host, Bobby Skinner, here with my co-host, the Football Grump. And the New York Giants have fired defensive coordinator Shane Bowen 2 weeks after they fired Brian Daboll on account of fourth quarter collapses. Well, guess what? In the post-Brian Daboll era, the Giants have a 100% hit rate of fourth quarter losses since then, or games where they had a fourth quarter lead. We're going to try and break it down from every point. And even like a little hint of Shane Bowen defense, really not much, but a little hint of it, and then talk about where we go forward. Grump, how are we feeling? You're having to do another emergency podcast from like your childhood bedroom.
Have I done an emergency podcast from here? I did one from a hotel room just a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm doing okay. I'm not. I think some fans are probably elated for this news. I think that a lot of fans were looking for a pound of flesh, and this was the juiciest meat available, right? To me, I mean, I think that this move is. We'll get into all the details, but I mean, I'm doing okay because I think that this move is justified. The timing of it is just like,
it's late.
It's negligible at this point what this is going to do. But yeah, it's late. It made sense at earlier times in the year to like just get this going and maybe possibly right the ship. There's no ship righting at this point. This was a dead man walking. I think we all knew that. I'm sure he knew that. So right now it's almost like bringing the dog out behind the shed.
Yeah, like they should have done it after last season, number one, but they didn't do it there. Then after the Cowboys game, we're like, man, you really could do it right here, right now, and it would be totally justified. And after the Broncos game, not doing it then, it felt like because of the reports of Brian Daboll being like almost fired after that game, it kind of felt like at that point that Brian Daboll was like, you know what, I'm not firing anybody on my way out. I know I'm out. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus as I sink. But it was always didn't make sense to me outside of the talking point of like, well, you don't want Mike have to deal with so much his first week as the defense coordinator to fire Brian Daboll while citing the fourth quarter losses when those were defensive issues, right? Obviously, the head coach has input on the defense, but like those were largely defensive issues in the fourth quarter. And then it's very funny that they first two games after Brian Daboll, they only had a 1-point lead against the Packers, but like nonetheless, they had a lead and weren't able to hold it. And then the 10-point lead versus the Lions, like those two games, they're nowhere near as dramatic as like the Broncos game or the Bears game, even the Cowboys game to an extent, because that one was such a back and forth shootout. But I didn't understand not doing it then. I understand Kafka has a lot on his plate, but now he's having to deal with this 2 weeks later when it could have just been a nice clean break when they fired Brian Daboll, like fire Shane Bowen with him, because that's what you were citing was the issue, was the defensive coaching. Nobody, when Brian Daboll was fired, was like, man, the offensive coaching is just terrible. Nobody said that when Brian Daboll was fired.
Yeah, I don't think so. There's just a lot of things that fly around. I think we knew that the entire staff was pretty much gone. At the moment that Brian Daboll was fired anyway. So I guess like it does sort of make sense, right? To not want to put additional responsibilities on Kafka's plate to deal with, moving upwards from, I guess, an offensive coordinator position this year, right? An offensive coordinator position to be a really young first-time interim head coach, and then have to deal with replacing himself and replacing a defensive coordinator and stepping up to a huge new role. So like, I do understand that, but it did feel like
they should have done it after last week then. Like I was willing to give them that 1 week grace period, but
sure.
It's whatever. Like they fired him. It's better late than never, I guess.
It is. I just think that a lot of the firing of Brian Daboll had to do with the optics of Jackson Dart getting hurt being like the final straw, which I don't think is a good reason, right? There are plenty. There's enough good reasons to fire Brian Daboll that are just he's not a good head coach reasons. But because of that, like I think that triggered that firing at that moment, and then it became less about the defense being the actual problem here. Like in terms of the on the field results of like why they are losing games this year, there are a multitude of reasons, but it's not the offense, right? It is the defense. And all of that does fall on the head coach. So you're still justified in firing Brian Daboll. But yeah, I get it. But again, like you said, like, fine, give him a 1 week grace period and let him get ready for the first game. But let him know as soon as that game is over, like, he's going to have to start getting all his pieces together for somebody else to handle the defense, because they're going to go after Bowen after that, regardless of what happens on Sunday. But they didn't do that. They gave him 2 weeks. I guess. Well, let me ask you this: is there a specific is losing the game last week? How much does that factor into this, in your opinion?
The Packers game or the Lions game?
No, the Lions game.
Oh, I think it's fully the reason, right? They had a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter and they lost the game, right? Like, they weren't able to have enough any more defensive stops to hold that lead. Like, I think it's really as simple as that, paired with the fact that you had a 19-point lead against the Broncos, right? That's an all-time collapse. A 10-point lead against the Chicago Bears. That's a collapse. The Cowboys won what it wasn't really like a full-on collapse. Again, it was back and forth, but I think that was the worst actual point. That's where I feel like if I'm blaming Shane Bowen the most, it's the Cowboys game, because that end of game soft zone was unbelievable. They were extremely basic in what they did. And then you have the 1-point game versus the Packers. Somehow the Saints game keeps on getting collected into this because, they scored on their 2 opening drives, but like, they had 5 straight turnovers. I don't think it was this huge defensive issue. It was just that's
actually the best example of the offense failing this whole year.
Yeah, really. So like, somehow the Saints game, but whatever. Like, the defense has been bad. But I kind of want to like chronicle this whole issue of like how we've gotten to Shane Bowen, right? And with Brian Daboll, I don't think Brian Daboll ever had strong belief in Shane Bowen. I felt like he was stuck with him after the terrible PR from the Wink Martindale resignation firing. Brian Daboll was damaged goods at that point. And we don't know exactly what the order of the guys were, but we do know that Denard Wilson from the Ravens turned him down and went to the Titans. Bobby Babich turned him down and was promoted to the DC by the Bills. And you see on Hard Knocks, Brian Daboll saying, if we get our run defense to look like this, talking about Shane Bowen, then we're going to be good. Well, they were 27th in rushing last year. They're dead last this year. Like, it clearly wasn't his first choice. So I don't necessarily blame Brian Daboll for the hiring of Shane Bowen initially, right? Like, his defenses were never bottom half. They were always top half of the NFL. They were good stopping the run. But they should have fired him last year after they saw him separately from Mike Vrabel. And we'll talk about like why Shane Bowen's a bad defensive coordinator schematically. But they didn't fire him after last year. And I always say, why not last year? Because I think it's a similar Giants issue. Hope, fear, and optics, right? It's optics of Brian Daboll having to fire another defensive coordinator, right? He's second fired defensive coordinator in 2 years. Like, that's not a bad look. Fear of not being able to find a better defensive coordinator, which that's the thing I hate the most about it, and hope that adding a few pieces to the defense would turn Shane Bowen into a good defensive coordinator, right? Hoping that adding Paulson Adebo, Javon Holland, Abdul Carter, and firing Jerome Henderson would now make Shane Bowen a good defensive coordinator. The one that bothers me the most out of that is the fear of not being able to find a better defensive coordinator, because, they got turned down a bunch the year before. That's where I think it's a whole issue with the Giants, is like they only go surface level with things. Try and be innovative. Like, go and find the next great defensive mind. Go to college and find somebody who may not be viewed as like a top candidate, but you've talked to people and they think this guy is brilliant. And you go and watch some film and think, oh my gosh, this guy is the next guy. Whether it's a defensive coordinator at fill in the blank at Duke or whatever. I don't know why I mentioned Duke. I think I was thinking like Mike Elko was a good coach for Duke before he went to Texas A&M. And somebody in the NFL, right? Somebody in the NFL that is viewed as a really good up-and-coming coach, but he's on a defense that has terrible talent, right? And so I just wish that's the part that bothers me the most.
Well, what bothers me about that is I think that fear of being unable to find a better defensive coordinator is actually rooted in nobody wants to work with Brian Daboll. At that point, like if that's true, and that's my assumption, right? if that's true, then that's your impetus to get rid of Brian Daboll last year. Like, if you can't hire coaches because they don't want to work with your guy, which, by the way, like the attitude thing and being hard to work with, that Devil Wears Prada shit only works when you win. And, you hold your coaches accountable, the coaches, whatever. But, like, when you're losing, like, you can scream at me all you want. Like, it's not going to make a difference to me. It just makes me not want to be here. So, yeah, And you're right? Like even Mike Kafka as like an idea for an offensive coordinator, that was a good hire. I was on board with that hiring as it happened. A young guy who was, he had all these traits.
No ties to Brian Daboll, right?
No ties to Brian Daboll. He comes under the Andy Reid tree, kind of technically. And with Daboll, in that scenario, you're kind of thinking that he's going to be mentoring Mike Kafka to sort of replace him. So, like at the time, we later learned that he just jettisoned him and just cuddled up to his buddy Shea Tierney. But that kind of hiring on the defensive side of the ball is what you could have been doing. Like, I'm sure there's a linebackers coach out there that works for, I don't know, Vic Fangio or somebody that you can pull from that like comes from a good system, that's young, that's hungry, that wants to work. I think you can do it. And I don't even think that's that bold.
Especially
anymore.
on the defensive side, because defensive coordinators get chances if it goes badly, right? It's not the offensive coordinator and head coach. If you get fired, the chance you're ever getting a head coaching job is locally. Offensive coordinator, you only get one shot if you're middle of the pack or whatever. But let's talk about why Shane Bowen was bad, right? I always believed that Shane Bowen was kind of like a puts out what you put in defensive coordinator, and that's just not going to cut it in the NFL when talent is, when you're all NFL athletes out there. And again, unless you're just flush with amazing talent and great run defending players all across the board. So like the Giants rankings and defensive stats under Shane Bowen in 2024 last year, 21st in scoring, 8th in passing yards, 27th in rushing, 28th in EPA per play. This year, 30th in scoring, so got worse, 27th in passing, dead last in rushing, and 31st in EPA per play. So it got worse this year. The team as a whole was 5-24 with Shane Bowen as defensive coordinator. He lacked aggression. He lacked disguise. He lacked game planning specific teams. That did happen sometimes, though, even recently. And not much effort put into the run defense to make up for the issues. I don't fully blame him on that one because that leaves him so vulnerable on the back end with the issues they had. But at the end of the day, like, the offense was ranked 31st last year, and I felt like they just like saw all those bad results by Shane Bowen. And I think what was a badly called defense and just hope that, hey, better offense and add a few players to the defense and we'll be better. But like the specifics of that is like he lived out of basic man coverages and zone coverages, right? It wasn't, physical or whatever. Like it was basically, for the most part, cushioned man coverage with 4-man rush, maybe sometimes a 5-man rush. Their zone coverages were basic, right? Sometimes almost preseason level of basic. They didn't blitz often, but in a league that's not blitzing very much right now, he was ranked 19th, so it's not like he was, bottom 3 in blitz rate. But his coverage style behind his blitzes never really matched, and also they never sent 6 rushers, right? I don't have the exact numbers, but it's something I've noticed with the eye test on film, and Doug Analytics has posted some stuff on this of like, yeah, they have a decent blitz rate, but they're never sending 6. So it's never really an exotic blitz. It's just simple 5-man rushes, usually with man coverage behind it. And that's just easy for quarterbacks in the NFL to diagnose. Like if you ask, if I'm an NFL quarterback and you say, what coverage do you want to face? As long as I don't have the worst receivers in the world, I'd be like, a cover 1 blitz. Lose 1 player, get rid of that middle field defender, and play man coverage. You cheat your leverage wherever you want. I'm going to find the matchup I want. That middle field safety is doing nothing to stop me from doing whatever I want. I'm going to get the ball out on time and where I want to go. The end of games would revert into soft coverages, right? And here's where like I would apologize on film reviews, Grump, because I would be like, this is like, there's not a lot of defensive plays because there's nothing really exciting or new or entertaining here. This is very simple. Like I'm going to show you defensive plays, but you're going to see that there's really nothing different about this compared to, Madden a Madden defense. Again, it was basic 4-man rushes, basic man coverages with cushion, basic zone, and basic blitz packages. It was exactly kind of what he was, at least his final year in Tennessee, Grump. I did film streams where I did about 8 of them after the NFL draft in 2024. In that summer period, Grump, twice a week, I would stream an entire game of Titans defense. And we would literally sit there and chart every play. How many rushers on this? What type of coverage? Are we stunting the front? Stuff like that. And it was basically like, it was the exact same thing that you've seen out of Shane Bowen and his time with the New York Giants. So this isn't like they got a guy and he's surprisingly different. It's the exact same thing that he was with the Giants defensive coordinator. If anything, he changed for the better in these last 7 games or 7 games.
Shane Bowen is just not my style of defensive coach. I'm a big fan of making sure that offenses have to worry about what they have to face that week, and not just on like a personnel level. Like, they have to worry about what you're scheming and how they're going to be able to play their game. The entire NFL league right now is kind of skewed to the offense in terms of the way the rules are written and the way penalties kind of factor into automatic first downs. Kickers are way better than they've ever been before. So I don't. I mean, of course, I don't live in this world of like wanting like a vanilla lineup and play defense kind of situation, or whenever you blitz, only bringing 5, not disguising your coverages, obviously, right? But like, just in general, as a person who likes defense, like, I like bringing your game to them. Like, make them, instead of worrying about what they want to install that week or what they think, worrying about like matchups and players and where they should have their advantages, worry about schematically, what are we going to have to worry about with this team? And that's one of the reasons why I was a big fan of Wink Martindale. It's one of the reasons why I was a fan of Patrick Graham, with disguised coverages, with exotic blitz looks, and worrying about pressure. You remember how mad was it the Patriots were getting with Wink Martindale just blitzing all preseason?
They canceled the game basically.
I love that. That's what I want out of defensive coordinator. I want offenses to be worried rather than making sure that they have their play package installed and everyone's running their plays. So Shane Bowen to me was always kind of an uninspiring hire. And I mean, I guess we can, the good news of doing this now is start really taking a look around the league and see who might be available in terms of guys who aren't already defensive coordinators.
You gotta hire the head coach before. I'm not even thinking of who the next defensive coordinator is until we hire a head coach. And then, going off of who he's interviewing, who he's connected to. I will do a little bit of Shane Bowen defense. What? That's called a teaser, because guess what? First, one, like and subscribe to the dang stream. Like and freaking subscribe to it right now. Just don't make me beg for you. And we don't have any advertisers on this show, so we're going to talk about patreon.com/Giants Nation. It is the lifeblood of Giants Nation show. You guys stepped up for me. Continue to. If you want to be a supporter of the show, there's a $6 tier. I do encourage to do the $9.99 tier. It's just a way to support us, right? We do, film reviews that are exclusive on there. I'm not trying to create a bunch of exclusive content, but I do think me and Grump do so much draft content that's a lot of the stuff we do, we just can't spit it out on the channel. Even like interviews at the Senior Bowl and stuff, where I do think there'll be some just like, hey, this is footage that we would have never put out anyways. Let's put it out for the Patreon. You get stickers, you get entered into t-shirt contests every month. And it's just a way to keep this show alive. It's by the fans, for the fans, by a fan, who is a fan, who has a ceiling fan. Patreon.com/Giants Nation. You'll be glad you did. Would appreciate that. I do think ever since the Saints game, where Spencer Rattler said they don't disguise anything, and they didn't, right? It was the most basic crap ever. I do think Shane Bowen has changed to a point as a defensive coordinator since then. Like, it's been a mixed bag of results. You had the Broncos game in there where they blew it at the end and got very conservative at the end. But, like, he was, like, throwing some disguised look, right? Like, I talk about the film reviews. If you've watched the film reviews over the last month and a half, I've been like, hey, look at this. This is really cool. This is the type of defensive stuff that I like. it still lacked aggression with the blitzes. They went from a very basic man to more zone coverage based over this period of time because they just don't have the dogs to cover in man, especially with Paulson Adebo out. And so I do think, they've done that. The issue is, despite all that, the run defense is terrible, right? And I think that's mostly a personnel issue, and to defend Bowen a little bit, here's his rankings as defensive coordinator with the Titans. His last year, 16th in scoring, 13th in rushing. 2022, 13th in scoring, 1st in rushing. 2021, 5th in scoring, 2nd in rushing, right? And so that's, back-to-back defensive coordinators who have been, coordinated number 1 rushing defenses in the NFL in their final 2 years with a previous team who come to the Giants and have terrible run defense. I think that's a personnel issue. There's certainly things they could have done, thrown more run blitzes at teams and stuff, but that also leaves you vulnerable in the back end. I think what really killed him over this stretch of period, Grump, was the Paulson Adebo injury. The depth behind that was just pathetic. Like they were relying on Deonte Banks and Corey Black. And not to say Adebo was killing it, but Adebo was giving up 64% completion rate when targeted. Those two guys, 92%. Those guys were giving up a combined 36 more yards per game in their 5 games. They also gave up 5 touchdowns in their 5 games compared to 1 by Paulson Adebo in his 7 games. So I think that's been the biggest issue. I don't think that with Paulson Adebo, they would have been some good defense. I just think they wouldn't have been as pathetic as they've been over this last stretch of period. But at the end of the day, they do revert to some soft stuff at the end of the game. The Broncos 3-man rush. I understand why they called that, but you can't do that. They got soft overall in the 4th quarter in that one. This Lions game, we said it on the podcast last night that didn't think it was some terribly schemed game against the Detroit Lions. The Lions are supremely talented, and they ran the ball well, but he did get soft in that 2-minute drill at the end of the game. The Bears game, I actually fully defended Shane Bowen in the Bears game. There was no issue with the way he called that game at the end. Those guys just they simply were able to just work them defensively, able to find matchups and win. And then the Cowboys game was terrible at the end. That will be the worst Shane Bowen call, was the end of the Cowboys game. The Packers game had a 1-point lead, so I don't really count that. And what was the other game mixed in there? I think we covered all of those.
Did you cover Denver?
And Denver, right? They did get soft in that period of time. Now, there was some times where they blitzed and they got screwed in that too. So they were just kind of targeting Deonte Banks and Drew Phillips over and over again. So they did get aggressive a little bit in that Broncos game, and Drew Phillips and Deonte Banks were just burnt time after time. But that obviously giving up that is a huge issue. But he lacked aggression or ability to go for the throat. I think that was part of the big issue with the 4th quarter collapses. It's not to say that the Giants were this great team. It's just, when you have that lead, you should go for the throat, and Shane Bowen never did. It always felt like just trying to protect the lead.
Yeah, and so here's kind of my takeaway of I guess my my eulogy of Shane Bowen in 2025. The fact of the matter is that the surface level talent on the defense overall, not just the defensive line and the edge group or whatever, but overall, the surface level talent is okay. It's about average. You've got enough out of your starters. If you include Micah McFadden in there, the worst spot is probably that defensive tackle group. You don't really have a legitimate defensive tackle too, but Nacho isn't like some unholy scrub that doesn't belong on an NFL field. It's just that's something you would have wanted to upgrade, and their offseason moves to upgrade that were just not good enough. The bigger problem is that the depth is awful. It's actually worse than the depth on the offense. That really has hindered him. So, we can sit here and we can segment the 2025 season as Shane Bowen was involved with it into 2 separate groups, the pre-Saints game and the post-Saints game. But at the end of the day, Cordell Flott missed some time at the same time that Paulson Adebo missed some time, and Tyler Nubin and Javon Holland, and Micah McFadden's been out pretty much the entire year. Now, these aren't excuses, but there is a personnel problem that factors into all of this. But on the flip side, I mean, you can look at the offense, and even though the depth is somewhat better on the offense, they're dealing without Malik Neighbors. They're dealing, without Jackson Dart for stretches of time. They have no depth at wide receiver at all, and they haven't all year. They're dealing without Cam Scatterbo. So the offense has continued to score points despite these issues. So there is a coaching element here that Shane Bowen is responsible for. I think at heart, he doesn't want to put guys in compromising situations and put them on islands. I don't think that he trusts this particular group, and I think that has hurt him, because of the issues he has as depth, and as guys got hurt, like Paulson Adebo, Cordell Flott had missed some time. We were playing scrub safeties a couple of times this year. I can't picture which games we had a really, really bad safety issue. But nevertheless, I don't think that's who he is anyway, right? There is a coaching element where he's not an aggressive coordinator. And you could see it in those moments where he had to step up to the plate and couldn't let a big play happen. He crawled right back into his conservative shell, even in that post-Saints era at times. And, a lot of times a good offense, and I say this all the time too, is that whenever you're rebuilding a franchise or whatever, you're building something as a team, building a roster, fix the offense first. Get the offense right, because scoring points fixes a lot of problems. As long as you still know how to identify the problems and you're not, rose-colored glasses by your results, which has sort of been the issue here in the last 4 years, you can attract a lot of talent your way in the offseason just by being a team that scores lots of points. And in game situations, a good offense is one of the best helpers to a bad defense, because it allows the defense to play a lot more relaxed. They don't have to worry about every single play. Edge rushers can sort of pin their ears back when you have a double-digit lead a lot of the time. That is a huge helper. And this year, Shane Bowen was not able to get any help out of huge leads. The Denver one sticks out, right away, as that is a situation where the game is so heavily tilted to assist your defense and they still failed. That really does fall on, a coaching level thing and not a roster situation. So while I can acknowledge that there are roster hindrances and hurdles that he had to deal with that are definitely, in my opinion, worse than on the offensive side, I think at the end of the day, this was the right move anyway. This was the right move before the season started. It's the right move at the end of the season. So it's the right move now. So as much as we can defend some things with Shane Bowen, overall, this needed to happen anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, he never hunted for interceptions, right? 10 interceptions, 29 games. There was never an emphasis on hunting those. Let's move forward, because, we'll talk a little about the Shane part of this. But Charlie Bullen, the outside linebacker coach, will be named the interim defensive coordinator. They did have Marquand Manuel and Andre Patterson on staff, who were former defensive coordinators. Manuel for the Falcons under Dan Quinn. Andre Patterson was a co-DC with the Vikings under Mike Zimmer. I don't think either one of those or anybody you're looking at is they're going to fix this defense and they're really going to find a new identity. But Bullen doesn't have much of a resume, right? He was the Illinois outside linebacker coach with Brett Bielema in 2023, was hired by the Giants when they, fired the Wink Martindale staff. Before that was the Cardinals outside linebacker coach for 3 years under Vance Joseph. Was with the Cardinals as an assistant inside linebacker coach in 2019, and then was with the Dolphins as an assistant D lineman or inside linebacker coach for the Dolphins for 6 years. There was some Joe Shane runoff there. There might have been a report that they're friends. I don't know how much Joe Shane is influencing the outside linebacker coach hiring, but I'm not going to give you a ton of information on Charlie Bullen, but I know the first thought, and hey, this was my first thought. I was all right, Marquand Manuel or Andre Patterson, right? They've been defensive coordinators. I don't mind trying to go a little outside the box, right, for all those other things that we said, because it's if you're trying to see something, give somebody a chance to do something that they've never done before. Also, I'm just not super invested on the interim defensive coordinator for these last 5 games either, because it's nobody on the staff will be calling defensive plays for anybody next year, let alone the New York Giants.
I have a couple of thoughts on it. I think the Joe Shane thing is probably coincidental, but again, I don't know Joe Shane or Bullen, so I can't actually comment on that. Um, obviously, I think
I'm looking for a tweet. Hold on 1 second. Let's see.
if it's from
So
Voldemort,
Josina Anderson was the first
okay.
to report that Charlie Bullen was the interim DC. Um, uh, but she said one league source just now, Charlie and Joe are friends. You know, obviously there's crossover with mine. So I don't know.
Yeah, well,
And Mike Kafka did
that is
say it
not a
was
very
collaborative,
detailed
obviously.
sentence. I'll say that.
Yeah.
Um,
At the end of the day, they had to hire somebody from the current staff. They went with Charlie Bullen. I'm not really over analyzing this.
Yeah, I don't think I care too much. We'll see what happens at the end of the year. If Bullen is like retained or hired or something like that, then it becomes a different rabbit hole. But for right now, I think that there's some like right now the two portions of the team that are kind of underachieving are the defensive line and the defensive back. So you'd be hard pressed to, I don't know if you want to call it rewarding anybody, but like promoting Andre Patterson or Marquand Manuel anyway, right? Like those are units that are not performing. Now at the same time, you could say the same thing about the outside linebackers
Yeah.
underperforming what you'd expect.
I don't think any coaching. I don't think anyone looks at any position coach on this defense says good job.
Yeah. But I think ultimately they know the personalities in that building. I've listened to a couple interviews from him. Kayvon Thibodeau raved about him. And said that he's gotten a lot out of him and he's taken to his coaching very, very well. It may be that they see him as a motivator. I do think that being a core. Let me backtrack
It
that.
also could just be going for somebody young too. You know, Marquand Manuel's a former player. Andre Patterson is someone who has a lot of respect. And then Eggs, the linebacker coach. That's the only guy who I'd have been totally shocked. I was like, that's the guy you're making the DC? But, you know.
I mean, yeah, it could be all that. But I mean, I think I don't know what I was going to say now. I forget, but it doesn't matter. I don't think that it's that much. They know who's in the building and those personalities. Oh yeah, I was going to say I think that high level supervisory skills are not necessarily the same as low level coaching skills, right? So as a teacher, I think that Bullen might have been, based on some of the interviews and some of the things the players said, like not really coaching technique all that much, might be one of the reasons why the outside linebackers are not performing to standard. It's possible. I don't like hearing that he doesn't coach technique that much, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily make him a bad higher up coach. Like if he's a motivator, if he's a scheme guy, an X and O guy, all of that is more applicable to that level. And I think that they would know that internally long before anybody on the outside like you or I would know. And it might have something to do with that. But like you said, it might just be a young guy who's a change of pace.
Yeah, like I said, Mike Kafka is not going to give us any explanation. It just kind of is what it is. Let's talk about Kafka's presser real quick.
I do want to talk about that because I thought it was interesting. Yesterday, he said, I have full confidence in Shane Bowen. And then today said, it was my decision.
Can I say something? Even if you think you're going to fire him, you have the opportunity to not. And I actually think it's like, all right, well, yeah, I changed my mind, right? Instead of doing what Daboll did and being like, some weeks he would answer, yeah, this is our guy next week. And then other weeks not, leading to, 24 hours of speculation. Just what's the harm in saying, yeah, I have faith in him, and then firing him the next morning after really thinking about it and not 5 minutes after a football game.
Oh, there is no harm in that at all. And also, if you're an interim head coach, whatever. Like, I also think, like you said, like you're 20 minutes after just, being heavily detailed thought process. And now you're answering questions that are more big picture. Like your brain's just not in that headspace. So yeah, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I was just wondering if you felt that it was all true. I do think that it was, Mike Kafka's decision and not anybody else's. Do you feel differently?
I'd be guessing, but I don't see why not. I mean, the rumor was the reason why Shane Bowen wasn't fired off rip was they wanted to let Mike Kafka make the decision on him when they made him the interim head coach.
Okay.
Which I think they shouldn't have done. Or whatever. Forget. we're sitting here arguing about interim coaches that I just don't care about that much.
Exactly.
The other thing was the Dexter Lawrence thing. I
Mm.
think whenever a team's like this and you lose, you instead of talking about you just try and figure, like, find two things that you're mad about. And the Dexter Lawrence not being on the field, he was dealing with some type of injury. And it was clear after the game, Mike Kafka said he had a nick. There was a clip that Jordan Renan posted basically where it's like, what's going on? You're not saying anything. You keep on like just kind of finishing the reporter's answers and not actually answering it. So like dealing with some type of injury. So that's the one thing we know. What we don't know was what is the injury, because it's clearly something new. I guess it would have happened in game. What the significance of it, because they said they were able to use him on third down, and who is ultimately responsible for him not being out there at the start of overtime. It's easy to put that blame on Bowen. Kafka didn't necessarily. At the end of the day, Kafka is the one who should have owned that. It's overtime, so it's different than the flow of a game, but position coaches are usually in charge of the rotation of that position on positions that rotate. But it's, they clearly, within the medical staff or whatever, they had some plan of Dexter Lawrence is going to be in on third down, right, because of an injury. So I know that gets like this idiot Shane Bowen. Like I'm not killing him for that. If anything, Mike Kafka should be killed for that. If you're pissed off about it, I'm pissed that Dexter Lawrence going off the field means that they give up 70-yard rushing touchdowns. That's what
I'm more mad about that than And the other, we don't know anything about this injury, so that's not all we don't know. This could be an injury he's been dealing with all year that they've been tight-lipped about, that got aggravated in a significant way during this game. We don't know anything, so I'm kind of backing off of that one. We haven't really talked about it so much, and I agree with you. Like it's so easy to finger point and be like Shane Bowen's a moron, but like it's it's the head coach too. Everything is going to fall at the feet of the head coach as well. So we'll have to, and I'm sure that we'll get the full story when he either lands on IR or the season's over and everybody gets fired and all the leaflets are left on everybody's desks when they get the
supposedly he said Dex was crying because he wanted to be out there or whatever, and they pointed to the camera at him a couple times on TV of him and RJ Patterson shaking their head.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about what happens next and a little bit of hint of Joe Schoen. I really don't want to make this episode about Joe Schoen. The next 4 games, I went and looked at it, Grump. They are in line to have some of their better defensive performances. So you have the Patriots this Monday, who are 7th in scoring. They're good. They just lost their starting left tackle and left guard. And they have no depth behind them. So that could be an issue, right? Like just like the Chargers, right? Like the Chargers were viewed as like a good team and offense. And then they lose all their offensive linemen and were able to just abuse them, right? If there's any game where this defense abused an offense, it was the Chargers. Then after that, you have the Commanders, who are 23rd in scoring with Marcus Mariota at quarterback. The Vikings, who are 25th in scoring with J.J. McCarthy, who is basically the worst quarterback in the last 20 years besides Jamarcus Russell, supposedly. Like, I'm serious. In the EPA per play, like over the last 20 years, it's like Jamarcus Russell's last, J.J. McCarthy's second to last. It's crazy. I went from being like a J.J. McCarthy, like I don't, whatever, where I feel bad for him. And then the Raiders, who are dead last in offense. So we are on pace, Grump, for our typical end of season, like woohoo,
4-win run.
Look at what this team can do. I'm not
good young core.
Yeah, I'm not even stressed about the draft pick. I'm more just like, gosh, like if these games were sprinkled into the middle of the season and you ended the season with 5 wins. And these 3 were wins. Nobody would look at those 3 games as a reason, but those 3 games being in a row, I could already seeing that being painted as like, oh boy, see what happens when Shane Bowen's piece of shit's not here. Mm-hmm. Look at what can happen.
It was clearly a coaching issue.
Yeah, I'm just so
There's
ready.
A bye week sprinkled in there too, isn't there?
Yeah, so you have the bye week before Commanders.
So you coming back possibly with both healthy safeties. I think I was trying to look at it before we went live and I couldn't pull it up. I thought I saw a rumor that Micah McFadden actually could come back at
Yeah,
some
I
point
don't
this
think
year?
that's going to happen, to be honest.
I don't think so either. But I mean, you add all these things together, and all of a sudden, people are going to want Bullen to be head coach. So, yeah, I mean, this is going to be. I'll say this: at least it'll be an interesting end of the year, right? There'll be plenty to talk about.
I don't want interesting. I want this season just get done. Like
You heard it here first. Bobby wants a boring show.
yeah. I would sacrifice it. I would sacrifice boring shows. Like I'm not like I know so like Brian Daboll getting fired and Shane Bowen getting fired does have a little bump of views like in the a season like this that if they didn't make those hirings, but I'm just like that doesn't move. I put together a report for Body Armor Grump, and it was like a 4-week sample size. The last one was the last win the Giants had, the Eagles. By the way, we haven't won a game since Sister Jean died. And then I'm like, you know, it'd be nice if we went 8-9, there'd be just so much more interest in this show. You know, and it feels like that's what the Giants are aiming for, right? And I don't want to get into this Joe Shane stuff a ton. But I just will say this. This is the defensive rankings in order since Joe Shane has got the job. 17th, 26th, 21st, 30th. Everyone likes Wink Martindale. Those defenses weren't necessarily good. Yards per game, 25th, 27th, 24th, 30th. So consistently bad. And this is where, like yesterday, right? Wandale has a game. Theo Johnson has a game. It's like, man, there is good young pieces. And it's like, you got to look at the big picture of all this. And I think having Dave Gettleman as a comparison, I think is a good, like Dave Gettleman had a defense that was ranked 9th in year 3, right? They were 9th in scoring in year 3. Dave Gettleman also had 2 seasons of offenses being ranked 31st, just like Joe Shane, with 2 seasons with them being in the teens, like Joe Shane. They're 22nd in scoring this year. I could see them getting back into the teens. Like Dave Gettleman, he may have a roster ready to, with great coaching, make a playoff run. But it's like great coaching in year 5 should have you being a Super Bowl team. And again, we also have to get the great coaching. And this is where I will talk about this specifically with Joe Shane, of like talking about defending him because, well, look at the coaching. Joe Shane had the opportunity to last year. He knew these guys as good as anybody. He's in the building, right? He knows the ins and outs. He knows the secrets. They could have analyzed this defense, analyzed Brian Daboll, and Brian Daboll's desire to keep Shane Bowen as defensive coordinator, said, we need to fire the head coach. I would have not been super thrilled with them splitting it, but that would have been the better decision if they keep Joe Shane this year. So it's like, how did you not identify that after a 3-14 season, and that season before the 3-14 season is the season where we saw Brian Daboll's flaws on high alert, right? Like just the all Mike Kafka thing, all the details that came out when we did our Brian Daboll episode 2 weeks ago, Grump. A lot of the details of why Brian Daboll wasn't a good coach were from the 2023 season. And so why not fire them then? What did you think that these guys were going to do this season? What did we learn? Did we learn anything new about Shane Bowen or Brian Daboll this season? If anything, we learned Brian Daboll really liked Jackson Dart and was able to coach Jackson Dart fairly well. The only thing difference is that they had some leads in this year. And Shane Bowen had the opportunity to blow those leads. Like how weren't you able to identify that last year? If you're in this spot where you've got both these guys fired, why wasn't this firing made happen last year? Like again, it's just they're constantly late to the party. And as much as like I want to see Joe Shane, if he keeps the job, turn it around. And if they go freaking 9-8 or whatever next year, I'm gonna sit here and be excited. But it's because that's so much better than what we've dealt with. I just wish they would put somebody else in charge to put this around instead of just giving guys one last chance. I feel like the Giants just too often, here's your one last chance for you, instead of just being like, hey, let's start over. Let's restart this whole thing instead of giving everybody a last chance. This isn't deserved to try and turn this thing around. We'd be so much better off. You can look at the examples of the Bears hiring Ben Johnson and being a good team this year. What's the other? The Patriots But I'd argue that Elliott Wolf was a terrible GM for the Patriots, and he's not even running the show there, and they should move off from Elliott Wolf. I'd argue that Ryan Poles, well, I think hasn't done a terrible job. I don't think he's done a very good job either. And I think a lot of his successes were based off of luck of having the worst record on a year where the Panthers wanted to trade up a ton, and then having Caleb Williams that year, having the worst record in the NFL the year next, and Ben Johnson viewed as like one of the top head coaches being willing to go to you. So that's just kind of where I am with the Joe Schoen part of it. I don't want to spend this whole episode talking about Joe Schoen and making every episode about Joe Schoen.
Right.
But it felt like we had to talk about it at the end a little bit.
It is relevant, right? I mean, to some extent, I'll give Poles credit for getting Ben Johnson, because I think hiring a head coach is a job of a GM, right? So it's still a win no matter what, whether he was
right.
willing to do it that year or not. Like, I don't know. That seems, it's a little bit splitting hairs there, but I agree with you across the board. I think the bigger thing was that Joe Schoen wanted to bring Brian Daboll here. And this is kind of assumption, right? So speculation on my part, but it feels a lot like Joe Schoen's fixation on Brian Daboll coming here in the first place and sort of the cursory, half-assed interview process along the board.
We saw the Brian Flores text. It was basically a shoe-in for Daboll.
Exactly, right? I think that is centered more around Brian Daboll's ability to get and develop a quarterback. And when Daniel Jones' contract just didn't pan out, pretty much from like the moment they re-signed him, that first goddamn 2023 game that I sat in the rain for, being an absolute disaster, Joe Schoen's like just refixated on that quarterback piece. And then it kind of just became about that more than it became about Brian Daboll overall as a head coach. All the other facets of him being a head coach, like you said, the evidence was on display early on in this process, not being able to get along with his coordinators, just being generally difficult to deal with, having meltdowns on the sideline. I don't need to go through the whole list again, but the evidence was all there. But it was like he was clutching at like this life raft of like, but this guy's supposed to get my quarterback, and I still believe in that side of Brian Daboll. Maybe I can fix 3 or 4 other things or whatever. And then I think, as time went on, it just, I'm not going to be able to fix anything about this guy, but if he can get me a quarterback, at least that's something, which is a little shitty. But also, I just think it's acting like Brian Daboll is the only person on earth that can identify quarterback talent and develop it, which is just flawed thinking.
It is flawed thinking.
I think that's really at the core of retaining Brian Daboll was like, I can't fire this guy yet. He hasn't got me my quarterback, which is why I brought him here to begin with. That seems to be like,
well, they were on the same page for a lot of things, right? That's another thing is like,
but like what?
Their whole team building, collaboration was their fucking key word for 3 years. Everything collaborative. That
they
went away a little
said
bit
that
last
a lot, but do we really know that? Like, it seemed like they were at odds.
I mean, they planned
the quarterback.
They planned an entire scheme to force Wink Martindale out.
That is true.
They did an 8 a.m. press conference the day after the season,
You're
which
right.
has never ever happened, and then fired his outside line, fired 3 coaches, and then waited till later in the day to fire the outside linebacker coach. Said that they wanted to keep Wink Martindale.
Yeah,
and
no, I get it.
They were.
I mean, but that's that is a
like
good example of them being
jelly.
on the same page and shit. But at the same time, and we don't need to rehash the whole series of events. Like Wink Martindale was out of line and was operating in a way where
I agree. But what point are you making? I don't understand what point you're making right now.
We keep hearing that they were very lockstep in things, but I think that's just like a vague point that's made without a lot of evidence pointing to it. And I don't mean from you. I mean from the people who talk to people in the building and are supposed to be getting us these stories and citations. Like,
I mean, look at some of the behind the scenes stuff. The 2023 draft, diaries that they do. Who's whispering to who when they're 2 picks away from being on the clock, right? Whispering to each other and not saying anything to anybody.
Okay, but that's so anecdotal. Like GMs are
Okay, but what would
supposed
you need as proof that they were collaborative and everything? I mean, he brought him back for a year 4 after going 3-14 when the
and
Giants
again,
were the Giants as an organization were very willing to keep Shane and fire Brian Daboll last year. The stories were written.
I think that had more to do with this guy hasn't gotten me my quarterback yet. And I think that in general, a GM should be working side by side with his head coach on draft picks to begin with.
Sure,
I think
yeah, but I'm saying
that's
that's
a
way
huge
more
reason why
speculative to
Coughlin and
say
Jerry Reese had so many problems, is that they were drafting players that Coughlin didn't agree with and wouldn't play.
But that's way more speculative to say that he kept him to be a quarterback scout.
I said it was speculative, but what I'm saying is that there's no specific stories from anybody about them being like, there's no like,
the Wink Martindale thing.
And again, Wink Martindale did need to be fired.
I understand that, but they could have just fired him Monday morning like they did the other people.
But they didn't want to. Wasn't there like contract reasons they wanted him to quit?
Yeah,
so they had to come up with a way around it. And again, like
it was their way of getting back at Wink Martindale for doing all the shit that he did.
I guess, and again, and that's also early in the process. There's no stories that are like, yes, him and Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen were both in full agreement about Malik Neighbors. You know, they were both in full agreement about this. There's not a lot of that's been out there, and it could all be true. And
what is the point? I don't understand what are we going at right now? I don't understand what we're even talking about.
The idea that they were a matched pair this whole time that they were here. And like my initial point was like,
what's the point of it?
Because I was speculating that the only reason he was holding on to him anymore was because of the quarterback thing.
Yeah, I think it's more because that was actually his guy than being a quarterback scout. But is there anything else? I wanted to, as a birthday present for you, everyone to go follow Football Grump on Twitter at @football_grump. So let's see. What are you? I just put the link in the chat for people.
I think I eclipsed 5,000 yesterday.
Yeah, so you're at 5,007. Let's get them at 6,000. They can easily do that right now. So let's get them to 6,000 by the next episode that we do. So you guys aren't going to see me and Grump together until post Thanksgiving, unless something other. We have to do another emergency podcast. So we will see you guys. So go follow Football Grump on Twitter. Let's see how many followers have you gained in the last 30 seconds?
I don't know.
You've gained 5 in the last 30 seconds. I like that.
Thanks, guys.
Anything else before we roll? We're at 52 minutes. We basically hit all. Interim coach Joe Shane Bowen. Goodbye, Shane Bowen.
Wait. Here's the question: is there going to be a mailbag this week because we did an emergency here?
No, we're not going to put out a mailbag.
So then that means next episode's Friday, right?
Yeah. So this is the mailbag episode. So have a happy Thanksgiving, everybody, and we will see you guys when we see you. Until then, let's go Big Blue.